Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest in the Q Software series of educational webinars. Today we're talking about how to prepare for your next security audit. If you don't know me, my name is Mike Ward. I'm the Chief Executive of Q Software, and later on you'll hear from Brian Stans, our CTO. If you haven't been on a webinar before with GoToWebinar, on the right-hand side of the screen, unless you've moved it, is the GoToWebinar control panel. If you want to blow it out, there's a orange arrow to the top. If you click that, it will expand it or contract it. And if you look down, you'll see various tabs. If you wish to connect with us to ask a question, everybody is on mute. Just click on the questions or the chat and send those any points to us, and I'll try and explain them or bring them out as we're going along. But feel free to speak to us that method. We are recording this session. He says that, and then he better check to make sure that he is recording it. Yes, I am recording it. So if you need a recording to share with your colleagues, or if you'd like a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, please ping me afterwards. You can reply to the reminder you got about the webinar earlier on, just before we started, or else you can ping me at your convenience at the email address that I'm going to provide you with later on. All right. So let me just move on then. We're aiming to make this about 30-35 minutes, so it'll fit into your day without too much, but it is, I stress, an educational webinar today. So here is our agenda. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but the key areas we're going to talk about are what is an external security audit. Interestingly enough, there is at least one external auditor on the line here who I know probably knows a bit more about this than I do. But secondly, we're going to talk about the risks involved, and thirdly, giving you some top tips. And we'll finish off by looking at auditing tools, which we feel is a very large part of this. All right. Why can I talk about these things? Well, I've been doing this a long time. I have been in IT for 44 years now. I was involved with the early days of ERP systems 28 years ago. And we have done an awful lot of audits of ERP security over the last 3-4 years. So I've got quite a bit of experience of these issues. You can make your mind up at the end whether that experience is valuable to you or not. All right. So in summary, finally, of the introduction, what are we trying to give you today? What I would like you to be able to say is that I understand what an external audit is. Some of you will know already. But mainly the core issues is to have a checklist of preparation. These checklists are something that have come to us from auditors. We've got an auditor or two on our payroll. Mainly the core is to know what the risks are, the things to avoid, and the main controls you need to put in place. And we're going to finish with some top tips. All right. I always feel it's a good idea to have a summary here point. So that is by way of an introduction. As I said, if you've got any questions, just reach out to me on the questions or the chat box. All right. But let's get going. And I thought we'd actually start this by reminding people of this core question, because I think that people are confused today, particularly for the younger generation. I think we're supposed to call them millennials, as to why you would have an ERP system, because they've been around. It's 28 years, I think, is the official view of this, but they came in progressively. And the point is that we were aiming to provide information. Right? What we were trying to do was to make all of the corporate data available to people so that they could actually make the right decisions. It's about running the business better. It's about the performance of the business by making decisions rapidly, by giving quality information. At the same time, we were trying to reduce inefficiency, to reduce cost, to make the decision making and the capture of the information more efficient. And we did this by creating a single database and making all the applications share that database, a one customer file. And we did this originally to enable us to share one file, for instance, sharing a customer file between the ledgers, the sales side of the business, and also from the customer management side, a single data file. But the real problem behind this now, over the last 10, 15 years, is the opportunity for fraud that has arisen, which we didn't foresee 30 years ago. And particularly what we're talking about today is the means by which the end result of all this process, which is to process your financial statements, to publish your profit and loss, either for your own benefit as running the business, or more particularly if you're a listed business, you have to publish them in the open so that people can actually see them. And most of you will be aware of the fact, of course, that 14 years ago, 15 years ago, there were a number of big blow-ups on the basis that people were manipulating their financial statements. And at that stage, of course, for right or wrong, the SOX legislation was introduced, and people were put under pressure to actually make sure that the financial statements were being prepared properly. All right? And whether we like it or not, and I think generally speaking it's a good thing that came out of that an industry which is now called governance, risk and compliance in the IT sector, which is people looking at the way that these financial statements are prepared. So that the objective of an external audit, in a nutshell, is that it is, as you can see on the screen, conducted by an independent auditor. The word independent is extremely important to ensure that the company's financial reports present a true and fair view of financial performance and financial position. i.e., the auditor's job is to look at the way that your financial information is being presented and make sure that it is correct. In particular, what they're looking at, because they can't look through every transaction, is that the controls are in place to make sure that manipulation is not taking place. That is what happened in some of these examples 14, 15 years ago. And it still happens today. And the auditor's job can be a difficult one. But you've got to understand that they're there to actually conduct this because people have done it in the past. And they want to make sure, whether you're a public traded company or whether you're privately owned by a family trust or whatever, that the information being presented to the stakeholders is correct, and that you're not in a position whereby people can manipulate it. And the overall issue is one of controls, that you are in a position whereby your controls are not such that people can actually get into parts of the system they shouldn't do, and that they should not be lax, such that things that shouldn't be done are not committed on your system. So the job of the auditor is to look at these controls, and their job is to make sure that when looking at the balance sheet, etc., financial statements, that the controls are in place to make sure that the manipulation of the numbers, of the figures, cannot take place. And that is their key point. And I think this is probably the most confusing part to the IT section of the business, who have to host the auditors, that they often forget that it's controls that are driving the auditor's interest. It's the controls that they're going to look at first. And in summary, if you present your controls properly, if they are in place, they're documented, you provide evidence of how they're working, the audit is actually going to go fine. If you have no controls in place and are not able to prove them, the audit is going to go badly. So what are the controls that what are the things they're looking for in this? They are trying to understand whether you're going to misstate your financial records. They want to see that you're recording transactions properly, and that there is not room for people to put through unauthorized activity. Have people got access to the system whereby they can actually process transaction in an unauthorized manner? And bear in mind, it's the deliberate errors, the deliberate activity that gets the news, i.e. fraud, but accidental activity is just as important and can actually be very time-consuming and very costly to get over. For instance, the most common being somebody entering data into the wrong company records, all right, so that you are putting in perhaps payments or invoices or suppliers into the wrong ledger. And to have the proper row security in place, separating ledgers for different parts of the business, different companies, different divisions, is very, very important. Controls to enable you to ensure that you are not misstating your financial records. But the final issue is that you've got to be able to report accurately. How can you actually check up on these things if you're not reporting? And above all else, what you're trying to do is to stop somebody fraudulently taking money out of your business. The problem, as I see it always with fraud in an ERP system, is that it's not a very visible activity. You can be thinking that you're whiter than white, but because it's an anonymous fraud, it's done behind the screen of a computer and the screen is somewhere else in the operation, you don't actually know whether the person committing the fraud is dressed in a black shirt with a black tie brand and is carrying away your money in bullion. It's an anonymous fraud, and what you've got to put in place is the controls to make sure that you're processing these transactions and do not enable these kind of frauds to happen. So that is the overall starting point for what we're talking about. That is what an external security audit is. If I'm teaching you to suck eggs, I'm terribly sorry about that, but I think it's worth going through that. So what are the risks involved? All right, and let's have a quick look at that and understand how you need to manage your risks. First thing is that role-based access control is utterly crucial. All right, these role-based access control in a ERP system has been around for many, many years, nearly as many years as there have been ERP systems. What is a role? Well, it's based on a function within the business. So it's based on somebody doing a job. And what you want to do is to be able to offer simplified systems admin. As I always say to people, if you imagine that you're an ERP system with 1,000 users on it, perhaps you have 150 roles. You are managing security for 150 roles, not 1,000 users. Your security management is a sixth of what it would be. You give a role to somebody, when they leave, you take it back and you're ready to give it to somebody else. It makes for a much more simplified system of administration. It makes it much more understandable. It makes your compliance and your reporting much easier to understand. But perhaps most importantly, it enables you to control your segregation of duties because you can look at making sure that each role hasn't got a segregation of duties issues, and then when you give somebody a second role, you can check that as well easily to make sure that you're not introducing segregation of duties. Role definition is crucial, and people miss this. Particularly people miss the fact that it's a business issue. It's not an IT issue. All right? If you're sat in your IT department developing roles for your business on your own and giving them to the business, that is a mistake. They are business roles. And they should be based on business processes. They should be there for the management to sign off and own those roles, and then build the SOD rules around them. All right? It is our job in IT, yes, I am an IT person, to report and provide information so that management within the business can understand their roles and can actually look after it. And this is how you avoid the terrible security creep, right? Which is changes to roles ad hoc, without thought, without process, and then 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later, you realize your security model isn't working very well. Secondly, user access provisioning. People do not put in enough process around user access provisioning. Who approves it? Who has visibility? What if we give this second role to this person? Have we checked whether this is giving us SOD access? Have we put in place mitigation if we're putting in too much access? Have we put in place a periodic access review, i.e. once a year, perhaps once a quarter? How are we checking with the business, getting them to sign it off? And the only way that you can actually approve all of this is, of course, to audit your security and make sure that these things are actually happening. One of the things that people forget is access to master data. You need to look and make sure that you're not actually giving people within the business, particularly these kind of objects, programs within your business, which are IT functions, IT files. Are you allowing too many of your users to actually access these types of information? What they are and what they do, how they describe, will depend on what ERP system you're on. These numbers here are from a recent audit we ran, where 40% of the company's 500 users were able to modify the way that a process works within the ERP system, automatic accounting instructions, as they're called in that ERP. A terrible, terrible error, because it means that people can manipulate the process to take steps out of the commit their fraud and then put the steps back in. Terrible issue. People just tend to ignore it. Access to critical programs, same issue. All right? Do you know, Mr. Customer, who can actually access the sales price revisions program? All right? Once more in this example, same company, 38% of the 500 users could change sales price. Why? All right? I would say in almost any operation, if you've got 500 users, if you've got 5 people who need to access sales price revision, that is probably enough. All right? These are examples of very, very poor access control. The final issue is then full visibility of who actually can do these things. Do you have visibility? Can you show your auditor these reports? Right? There is no excuse for not having access to these things, not being able to put these things in front of your auditor. These are the things you need to be able to do. So what are the top 7 risks? Poor role design. Do you have poor role design? We've gone through it very rapidly. If you want to cover any of these issues, we've got a webinar on role design coming up next month. Log yourself in for that, and we'll give you a bit of education on that. Privileged user access. In some customers, this is appalling. They feel they have to give the whole of the IT department access to everything. You should never, ever, ever do that. Think carefully about your privileged user access. Your auditor, when coming in, will think very carefully for you if you don't. If they don't think about it this year, they'll think about it next year. You've got to look very closely at your privileged user access. As I said to the couple of slides back, giving IT users too much access to business apps, but giving end users too much access to IT apps. It's a mistake. You've got to have visibility. Who can access what? What can be accessed by who? And you've got to look at the end-to-end processes. Segregation of duties is about process management. It's about looking at a process and deciding how many people need to be involved in that process and how you can break it down and not allow a single person to be able to commit, to go all the way through that process and therefore commit fraud. Change management. All right? It is appalling in some instances how little change management is in place. You need to whether it's changes to user access or whether it's changes to the system, applying ESUs, etc. You need to have an authorization process, and you need to have a testing process. All right? But above all else, in terms of what we're talking about, is lack of policies and procedures. We will have another webinar next month on more detail about policies and procedures. So that is your top 7 risks. All right. Let us move on to the final area, which is our top tips. We are going to show you a brief demo in 3 minutes on planning, actually delivering your audit, but and preparing by getting the information available. Well, what can you physically do before you actually invite your external auditor into your building? All right. What astounds me is that most people don't seem to do this first thing. What you've got to do is to think about it and prepare for it. What most people tend to do, as Brian is going to refer to in a moment, is to perhaps jump around and write some SQL scripts and try and get the data together. And what they don't think about is how to plan for actually meeting the auditor. All right? take a view. My view would be, if you've got 3/4 of the controls you need, I would declare the quarter that I haven't got, and tell them actually what you're doing to work on it. What you don't want to do is not be ready for them to say, right, where's your user provisioning control? Where's your change control? Check your documentation and have some evidence, i.e. an audit trail of what has actually happened. Hopefully that will be an IT-orientated audit trail rather than a written log, but so you can actually prove it. Have a look at last year. Have a look, see what they said. Make sure you followed that. Make sure you followed up on that. But if you expose weaknesses and you've got a good relationship, so long as you're making progress, they'll be fine. If you don't expose weaknesses and they find them, they will dig in, and that is their job. You shouldn't be harsh on them. That is what they're paid to do. Secondly, then sit down and meet the auditor before the audit. Tell them what controls you've got in place. Agree with them what they're going to do. Explain to them where you're still working on it. Above all else, and it astounds me that people do it, do not try and engage in evidence fraud. Do not try ever to build evidence to support your case which is not real, because if they find that out, you are almost certainly going to get a qualified audit, and then you're in deep trouble. And finally, this is the words of Eric, one of our auditors. Do not exaggerate. The thing he hated most, above all else, is that when a customer that he's auditing in the pre-audit meeting, or when they're going through the control, uses the words all, any, ever, every. Don't exaggerate. Don't use those kind of words. Use the kind of words that are practical. Most. We are trying to cover as many, and don't try and fluff over them. It won't work. So finally, what you need to do is to understand your risks. So you've done controls, you've got your controls in place, but you can only cover all your risks if you understand what they are. What are the risks, fraud risks on your system? Similarly, we'll have a webinar on this subject next month, but here is just some of the areas where fraud can arise. You need to understand them. You need to understand then how you are covered. Here is an example of a set of segregation of duties rules, or a subset of segregation of duties rules we provided to one of our customers for their ERP system. I think this is a JD Edwards system, looking at the numbers. But the issue is to understand the risks. You see the second column, and to put in place rules to get over that risk. Perhaps you're doing it with a spreadsheet. That's not a terribly successful way of doing it, because it's very difficult to keep the spreadsheet in line with your ERP system. But above all else, what you need to do logically is to run an audit of your existing security model before the auditor arrives. A, so you can give them the information, but B, so that you can actually sit in front of the auditor and say, well, here is the evidence. Here is how we're controlling these risks. Here is how we are moving forward, and how we are actually addressing these issues. So finally, what we're going to do in 5 minutes, let me give you a couple of slides to explain our audit service, and then Brian will show you a very brief demonstration. And what we're providing now is a new form of service. What has happened up to now is two types of things. Most companies of any scale, how do they prepare for an audit? For their information is that everybody rushes around trying to create reports. You cobble together a bunch of spreadsheets, you run some SQL scripts which you found in a cupboard from last year. They don't work properly because the guy who wrote the SQL has left, and etc., etc., etc. The auditor's job, I will tell you at that point, is to actually poke into your results and ask you questions which you can't answer. That is his job. So you're better off actually trying to actually get beyond that and be able to present the information properly using a tool. There are tools. We have non-prem tools. We have a product for JD Edwards called Audit Manager. We have a product for EBS called CS Compliant. But Oracle has some tools as well. I don't have any Oracle people on today by the look of it, but they can be very expensive, and they don't necessarily provide you with everything you need. And certainly if you're going in the direction of the Oracle ERP Cloud, they don't actually work. But they are there to help you, and for a large customer, they are extremely useful. For a medium-sized customer, they are vastly too expensive. So what we're aiming with Q Cloud is to automate this process by enabling you to log in, request an audit overnight, and to get the data back the following day. So on the right-hand side here is your ERP system. It could be JD Edwards, it could be EBS, and we're about to launch the Oracle ERP Cloud version at Open World next month. The data is extracted when you request an audit at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You log in and say, "Can I have an audit, please?" The agent, which sits on any PC, any device connected to your database, will suck the data out, encrypt it, transmit it up to the cloud, where the analysis is run, and then you'll get a URL back to your email saying, "Here are your results, log in." All right. Typical 1,000-user system on EBS will take maybe an hour to run, so it's not instantaneous, but it's very rapid. And what I'm going to do now is just hand over for 3 or 4 minutes to Brian Stans, who is going to just show you a brief demonstration of this.
Sounds good. So again, Brian Stans, CTO here at Q Software. Mike, can you see my screen okay? So good to go. So what you're seeing here is the entry point to the portal for our Q Cloud. And I'm going to just take you through a quick overview of what happens when you do an audit. So once you request an audit, so every customer is generated as a tenant. So they can come in and they can see results of their audit real time. Now, in the past, what we would do, and many customers would get these done, is they would get an audit that was a report, a PDF output. So today, in our automated process, we still do that. And as you can see here on the screen, this is an example of one of the audits in PDF form with all your results. But what we aim to do with Q Cloud was automate all this and make you have an interactive experience in reviewing all your audit results with your auditor, so that you can then either prove that you're in good shape or then be able to go and remediate and fix issues on the fly. Before I show you results of an audit, I do want to point out that we do deliver for Q Cloud a pretty comprehensive list of policies in EBS. In JD Edwards, we call them rules, but in this case, I'm showing the EBS side. These are validated through some different customers that we've done, plus we have had our internal auditors look through these as well. There's over 40. You can turn them on or off based on your business needs. You can also tailor them, meaning if you have your own custom functions within EBS or custom menus, you can add or delete different things within each one of these entitlements that are part of the policies, which is pretty powerful functionality. But the real meat of this is once you get in and can see your audit real time interactively. So what I'm going to do is show you here an example where we have this in EBS broken down into 2 sections. You have general security items that we're looking for. So for example, number of inactive users having responsibilities. So this is a cleanup activity. So you could come in here, see that number and say, wow, this is quite a huge number. You can click on that and instantly you're given the list of users that have responsibilities even though they're inactive. So this is a perfect example of where you go and you clean up your security, make sure it's in good shape. But the real interesting and important part here is your SOD violations. As Mike said before, he gave examples of where customers had large percentage of their users that are breaking rules that could cause fraud in the system. So in this case, you can see we're giving you back interactively information about any of the rules that are breaking or where users are breaking those violations. Now, when I showed you the policies, there were 40 some. However, in your report, you're only going to see the ones that are breaking those rules, which is good because then you don't have to weed through and figure out which ones are good, which ones are not. So once you find one that you want to start exploring, for example, supplier invoices, expense reports versus supplier payments, you can click on that and you'll see the list of users that are breaking that rule. And then you say, okay, well, what do I do next? Well, you pick the user that you want to explore, and you can actually go in and see the two different parts of that policy, the two entitlements that are in conflict, and it'll tell you what you do to remediate this. So in this case, the functions and menus that are displayed under either AP invoices, expense reports, or supplier payments, one of the two needs to be removed in order for you to then pass and be okay with that policy. So very powerful, right in front of you, the ability to see what functions and menus need to be fixed in order for you to pass your audit. So there's a number of ways to do filtering on this. You can take a look by user, you can take a look by rule. So that's about all I wanted to show today with respect to the online version. So Mike, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. And let me just bring you back to summarize a couple of issues here. What we've got here is, of course, the means to look at different trends in your data, to look at different ways that you can report on SOD and access. But let's bear in mind, this is live reporting, all right? When you request the data at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, it's taking that live data exactly. It's giving you information on which you can very rapidly make some decisions. You can then present that to the auditor. You can then get on with remediating any errors you've got in it. One of the things that people ask us, of course, is how secure is this? This is hosted at AWS currently. We are looking at hosting it on Oracle Bare Metal or whatever they're calling it this week as well. But the data is encrypted in flight. It is as secure as you can make a system of this type. If you don't like that, I'm sorry, but it's giving you the information you need. And I will also stress that, of course, we don't take any transactional data out of this. So summary, I haven't talked about Q software, so let me give you a brief background to anybody who understands us. We have development in India and in the UK. We are a UK-based company, and we support our clients in 3 time zones, covering the whole of the world, and we've got sales offices around the world. We've got around about 300 customers using our products, 2 major areas, of course, one being audit and the other being security management. These are JD Edwards customers and EBS customers. As I said, we're just launching an Oracle ERP Cloud version. In the last 5 years, we've done over 200 audits, and these are professionally done using the tools, so digging in deeper than most auditors are able to do. And of course, it's much more rapid using the cloud than any method using spreadsheets or any of the other tools. The Q-Cloud product is a very, very immediate solution to the audit. It enables you to dig in, and it enables you to ask questions. It enables you to provide data for the auditor externally. But to finish, on the top 7 tips, as I did volunteer at the beginning, the 7 ways that we would see that you would actually have a successful audit with your auditor coming in from the outside. Bearing in mind what they're trying to do, they're trying to look at your controls, and they're trying to look at how you've implemented their controls and how you've set up your security model. 1, plan internally. I went through that. Understand exactly what you've got, how you want to present it, and what you haven't got. Secondly, document your controls up front. Provide evidence. If you have gaps in your controls, I would personally admit them. So long as you've got the majority in place, you'll get through fine, but bear in mind you're going to have to complete that control cycle later. We have a webinar coming up on that. Make sure you review last year's audit in plenty of time. You will have made some commitments as part of that as to what you were going to sort. Make sure you support it. Avoid exaggerating. All right? So don't tell the auditor that all of your procedures are 100% correct and that you've never had any issues. All right? Do not ever commit evidence fraud. Don't make it up. All right? When you get found out, you will be in deep trouble. But above, perhaps at the bottom of it, is that you're going to need some tools. All right? Writing SQL scripts to produce your data is a very, very inefficient manner. All right? And above all else, running a security audit like the one we've just been through will enable you in a very cost-effective manner to be able to provide the evidence to sit beneath the controls. So I don't think we've got any questions today. So just to wrap this up, what we're trying to do in this education series is to explain to you how to very simply and cost effectively move away from risky methodologies on your ERP systems. Right? It's not necessarily about regulation and compliance, but it is about procedure, and it's about putting in place the policies. So we have a number of new webinars coming up. All of our main management webinars are going to be focusing on educational subjects. You see some of there, or you can visit our website and you can log in and go into those, or you can follow us on any of the following social media. And I'm no doubt, hopefully, we'll see some of you at Oracle Open World the week after next. But unless there are any further questions, I'd like to thank you for your time today, and please feel free to ping me. This session has been recorded. I'm happy to send the recording to you. There is my email address, and we can also send you the slides if they would be useful, because there's some checklists on there you might find useful. But unless there are any further questions, I said I'd take 35 minutes, which is about right. So thank you for your time today, and please check in with us soon. We'll have another education session in the series of Q Secure and Audit Your ERP next week and all the following weeks. But thank you for your time today. And as we say here in Denver, Colorado, have a nice day.